I want to tell you about a product launch that still sits with me till date. I laid a bet on a reporting feature. The thesis was clean, very confident. We believed that this feature will attract a specific persona into the product. More analytical, more data driven, the kind of users that we wanted to focus more on as a business. We framed it as a wedge. We build this and this persona will finally take us seriously. And so we shipped the feature. The feature worked beautifully. Usage went up, the needle moved, but just not enough. Not enough to justify the time, not enough to justify the confidence, and definitely not enough to justify the expectation that we had set. And suddenly the room started to feel different. Engineering team was quieter in meetings. Stakeholders stopped leaning forward and started asking for proof earlier. Nothing really exploded, but I was sure that something had cracked. Today's video is about how to rebuild trust after that kind of product launch failure. Not a dramatic outage, not a total flop, but the most dangerous kinds of product launch failures. The ones where we made a reasonable bet that didn't meaningfully pay off. And here's the hard truth. Failed launches don't just hurt product metrics. They actually hurt people's belief in you as a product manager, whether we like to admit it or not. They hurt their belief in you, that you understand the problem, that you are allocating the team's time wisely, and that you know when a bet is worth taking. What makes this particularly tricky is no one typically outrightly comes out to say that was a mistake. Instead, it shows up indirectly in questions like, how confident are we in this direction? What alternatives did we rule out? What makes this different from the last time? And so trust rarely collapses loudly. It fades gradually with a little bit of hesitation here and there. As a product manager, at some point in your career, you're going to have to go through some feature launch failures. The most important thing is, how do we rebuild that trust? That requires intent. These are some of the most common mistakes that product managers make after a failed launch. After a failed feature launch, teams tend to fall into two patterns. They either keep defending the outcome or they pull back entirely. Those that keep defending the outcome say things like, well, it moved the needle, gaslighting us to think that it worked. Some say it was directionally correct, maybe not the degree to which we were expecting. And some just chalk it down to the timing. The teams that pull back entirely, they tend to start having fewer opinions. They tend to start taking smaller and safer bets out of fear. And lastly, they tend to have reduced visibility overall within the organization. The honest truth is, both reactions are understandable, but both tend to make the trust quotient worse. Because really, trust isn't built on being right. It is built by being credible. And credibility starts with how failure is framed. So these are some things that you can do to recover from a failed feature launch as a product manager. Number one, own the outcome without overcorrecting. The most effective response to a mixed results launch is surprisingly restrained. Not celebration, neither an apology. What you need to provide as a product manager is clarity. Strong product managers explicitly name the gap between what was expected and what actually happened. They say things like, this validated part of our hypothesis, but not the outcomes we were betting on. The target persona engaged, but not at the depth required to justify further investment. No theatrics, no defensiveness, no self-blame spiral, just ownership and clarity. Here's where the distinction matters. Trust is never rebuilt by only admitting failure. It is rebuilt by demonstrating and understanding what is required to succeed. The second thing you need to do as a product manager in order to recover from a failed feature launch is separating the decision from the results. One of the most powerful trust building moves is walking the team through the decision logic, not just the outcome, whether positive or negative. This means revisiting things like the assumptions that we made, the ones that held, and the ones that did not. So in this case, the bet may not have been reckless, it was just incomplete. And so in my case with the reporting feature, the assumptions that we made were that the persona valued the reports enough to change their behavior. And secondly, surface level adoption would translate into habitual usage. But what we eventually learned was that the report was a nice to have, not a driver for behavioral change. And secondly, the real friction for that persona lived elsewhere within their workflow, not in our product. That shift in conversation is a way to start rebuilding trust as a product manager. The third thing you need to do as a product manager in order to recover from a failed feature launch is to make the learning explicit, not just implied. A common mistake after a mixed result launch is assuming that the learning is obvious. When you don't want to talk about your failures, sometimes we just want to assume that everybody understands what we learned, so there's no need to talk about it. But it's not obvious sometimes. So I trust makes what we learned visible. They name the bets that will not be repeated, they clarify which personas we might be deprioritizing, and they update the roadmap to reflect the new understanding and see other initiatives that might be holding the same assumptions, which we need to revisit. And so instead of just saying, oh, the new reporting feature did not work, they say things like, we now know reporting alone won't pull this persona into habitual usage. Any future investment must connect directly to their core workflow, which happens outside of our product ecosystem. They say things like, we now know that an in-app reporting feature alone won't pull this persona into habitual usage. Any future investment must connect directly to their core workflow, which currently happens outside our product ecosystem. That statement by itself, it's not defensive, it's directional, and it informs other things that we choose to invest in as an organization. Most people don't trust teams that never miss. They trust teams that learn confidently and loudly. The fourth thing you want to do as a product manager in order to recover from a failed feature launch is to change your behavior, not just the narrative. Don't just spin stories around, but you need to change your behavior and adapt the learning. And that's the uncomfortable part. Reflection without behavioral change does not rebuild trust. After launches like this, great product managers visibly adjust how they operate. Exit criteria are named upfront and are criticized before they are settled upon. And challenges are invited earlier from the rest of the team, especially from engineering and design and the go-to-market team. So the change here is not just an announcement, it's not just a performance, it's actually a practice. And you'll be surprised how many people notice the behavioral change from a product manager after a failed feature launch. What I'm trying to say here is you don't just rebuild trust by running a post-mortem. You actually rebuild trust because people see the difference in how you make product decisions. The fifth thing that you want to do after a failed feature launch is to probably take a smaller, sharper follow-up bet right after the failed feature launch. And this is probably something counterintuitive, but trust is not rebuilt with a bigger swing. It is rebuilt with a more precise one, hopefully ones that take in the lessons from the previous launch. The follow-up bet should probably have a tighter scope, a very clear metric, and very explicit trade-off and guardrails. When it ships, it doesn't need to be spectacular in order to overcompensate for the failed feature launch. It just needs to do exactly what it promised. And so going back to the failed feature launch and just deciding on a smaller and a sharper follow-up bet might be beneficial for you. Having said all this is a big lesson that I think most product managers learn late in their career. Early in their career, most product managers think trust comes from being right. But over time, they come to realize that trust comes from being clear, consistent, and willing to update their beliefs in public. A mixed results launch does not necessarily have to end your credibility or erode your trust. Avoiding the lessons in it and recovering poorly is what will end your credibility or erode trust. If you are watching this, there's probably a launch in your past that still feels unresolved, just like mine. And not because it failed totally, but because it didn't quite fully work either. So here is the takeaway. You don't build trust by erasing or avoiding failure. You build trust by metabolizing the failures. Name what has changed. Show how you've adjusted. Make the follow-up bet cleaner and sharper. And that's how teams recover quietly and durably. And so if this resonated with you, leave a comment below and tell me what's a product launch or a feature launch that taught you more than it's rewarded you. I'll catch you in the next one.